Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is October 17th, 2022, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? I haven't made videos in the last 2 months, and I just kind of wanted to give an update about what is currently happening because there's so many things that happened and also give it a little follow-up about the future. I am planning to continue making videos about the conflict, just less regularly. When I started in June, I was kind of planning to do it more on a daily basis, but I realized that it's just not matching my schedule. So I'm going to try to do it more on a weekly basis. So once per week or perhaps twice per week if I have time. And that way it'll allow me to still make videos the way I want it to be done and not having to rush through content and constantly try to produce things. Because at the end of the day, this is more of a personal project for me. I'm obviously Ukrainian, and for me, it's just in my personal interest to make videos about it and share my opinions about the conflict and all the news developing in real time. So that's what I'll do. And obviously, if you guys probably have heard, Ukraine has had incredible success for the last 2 months, beating off the Russians and pushing them away from the occupied territories that they currently hold in Ukraine. Most successful one is in Kharkiv, where the Ukrainian army was able to take back the Kharkiv Oblast entirely, and now are pushing through Luhansk and Donetsk as well in certain areas and as well as in Kherson, where they have taken also considerable amount of territory back. So, as I've mentioned, even back in July when I was making videos in August, that's what I was expecting is a counteroffensive in the beginning of September, which is exactly what happened. And so I'm very proud and happy that this is happening. But the war is not over yet. Let's not kid ourselves. The Russian army, as much as we want to discredit them, is still a very big army, full of soldiers, full of military equipment, and they still have a good amount of experienced, good soldiers. So I also don't want to be discrediting the Ukrainian army because they're, fighting an incompetent army. That's totally not the case. So all that being said, I want to get over a few news that are happening today. Again, there have been so many developments. I'm not going to go over everything that happened, but essentially, in the last few weeks, Russia's become much more, let's say, desperate since the mobilization happened. Putin understands that he cannot win this war with a few mobilized soldiers and conscripts that they're trying to get from the prison. So now they have mobilized hundreds of thousands of civilian soldiers. And also, they have resorted to using kamikaze drones against Ukrainian civilians and in the infrastructure as well. The typical barbaric agenda that the Russian army has in its playbook. But the Ukrainian news came out with today a news article about imagery of the drone manufacturing plant in Iran that is producing the Shahid 136 drones that Russia has been actively buying for the last few weeks that they're using against Ukraine. And so this factory is in Isfahan, which is, I think, the second or third biggest city in Iran. And you can see here that's essentially this is the Shahid 136 that they're building. It's a quite small facility, but I think this is a totally, I think Iran is not off limits in this case and should be hit if possible, because these drones are are doing havoc. As much as we're shutting down about 75 to 80% of them once they reach Ukraine, it's still a good 20 to 25% are getting through and still manage to hit, innocent civilians all throughout Ukraine. So this is, in my opinion, a legitimate military target for the Ukrainian army, and we should be somewhat find out a way how we can stop them from producing this. The question also begs, how were they able to produce these drones, knowing the fact that they're on heavy sanctions and the chips that are required to operate these drones cannot be, Iran just doesn't have the capacity to produce them. And there was an article where it was found out that China gave these chips through, various schemes that they were able to basically China was able to buy it from, I think, Intel, and then they kind of said that they needed it for some production of different, goods, and then they managed to sell them to Iran, which then used them, these Intel chips, to produce these kamikaze drones en masse. So, yeah, that's the situation right now in terms of that. But again, I truly am a big believer that this is not an off-limit, infrastructure, and Ukraine has all the rights to hit that as well. In other news, and I think this is more of a critical news, because it kind of shows the disarray and the state that the Russian Air Force or even the Russian military is in right now. This is an Su-34 that crashed into a civilian building today in the city of Yeysk, Russia, which I believe is in Krasnodar, the Krasnodar Oblast in Russia. And so you can see that the pilot safely ejected, is flying away, but the airplane literally crashed into a building with people in there. And I'm sure there's going to be dozens of dead people. But this is an Su-34 jet fighter. I think it's a bombarder fighter, so its main goal is to bombard. It's not a dogfighter. And so this is a relatively modern jet fighter that began production. Production began in 2014, and so this kind of shows the state that the Russian Air Force is in, because one, this seems to conclude because the news indicate that this was a possible engine failure. So for a plane that is from 2014, how can you have an engine failure? Mostly because you don't have either the right parts, one, or you don't have the right maintenance schedule, right? You have poor maintenance, and then everything breaks down very quickly. And three, it could also indicate a lack of professionalism experience within the pilots themselves. Russia's been waging war for 8 months, and um, every week you can hear about another airplane that was shut down, the pilot died. They're in lack, and I believe so, they're in serious lack of professional, experienced pilots. And I think if you guys haven't heard in the last few weeks, there've been a lot of news. I would say about 3 or 4 articles, which, indicated that there's been, airplane crashes right after takeoff or right before landing in Russia and in Crimea. So this kind of indicates more and more that the Russian Air Force is just lacking um, all these three factors I've mentioned before. And so this is going to be continuing on more and more as this war progresses, because Russia is just incapable of, producing and being completely reliant on their own parts. And also, it takes time to produce quality, experienced pilots. You can't just replace them in a matter of a few months. This is what happens if you try to replace them in a few months. You get pilots ejecting in their, jet fighters in civilian areas. So, more to come. That's all I have to say for this. Another great news for Ukraine is that Russia is running low on cassette bearing, not cassettes, but cassette bearing for their freight cars. And it's about 10,000 right now, but there's 200,000 more that are serious risk of having this issue. And it's great news because if anybody knows, the Russian doctrine of war is they're really reliant on railway systems to supply their soldiers with everything, fuel, food, ammunition, transport, military assets. Everything is usually transported via freight and not via airplane or, boat. It's really, or even land, right, by cargo trucks or whatever. It's really through freight cars. And the less they have of them, the less they'll be able to be effective to push further into Ukraine. This is the main reason why they have been able to push really far away into Ukraine, is because they couldn't control the railway system that they're so reliant on to continue pushing. And last news today is that Ukraine is almost done developing a long-range kamikaze drone, basically our answer to the Shahed 136 drone that Russia is buying from Iran. So this is great news. We need these drones, and if anything, this war has shown us is that the future of warfare is with drones. Drones have shown to be very competent military assets, especially if you have complete air superiority. And I think that this is really great news. I wasn't even expecting that Ukraine was working on some sort of secret project. But now I think it's not so secret anymore, but it's also a way to show the Ukrainian people that they are working on it to make sure that they have an answer to the Shahed 136. And I think now, since Putin is just without any discrimination hitting civilian targets all throughout Ukraine, I believe that Ukraine should be answering back by hitting military infrastructure in Russia everywhere. And these drones are the answer. I am not a serious proponent for a tit for tat action. I think Ukrainians are better. We're not going to be hitting, civilian infrastructure and killing civilians. But we have the complete right to hit military infrastructure within Russia that is supplying their army and supplying the death and sponsoring the death of hundreds of thousands of innocent Ukrainian people that have already felt, the tragedies and the barbarism that Russia commits in Ukraine. So this is great news, and more to come. I am waiting with impatience, the time when we'll be able to cripple the military industrial complex of Russia and really bring them to their knees. So that's it, guys. I'll try to get back to you within next week with another video. If I feel like I have the time, I'll make another this week as well. But that's about it. And thank you for bearing with me. Leave a comment, a like, and subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more. But that's it for me, and I'm wishing you a really good day. Thank you.